Hello everyone, my name's Louise Astbury and I'm the Director of Oldham Sixth Form College Associate Research School, and I'll be delivering this course for Evidence Leads in Education. So this is just a very short video for some preparation before we do the course in a couple of weeks' time. So what we're going to cover on the first session of the course are these things. I thought what I'd do today, though, is talk to you about what the Education Endowment Foundation actually does and what the Research Schools Network actually does as well. We'll do a little bit on tackling the disadvantage and attainment gap, and then the other 3 bullet points we will look at in the actual session together. So before you come to the session, I've given you some pieces of reading to do that are on our microsite that we'll use for all our pre-reading and our gap tasks. So there's some reading for you to do there. But what I'd like you to consider is currently in your school or in your mat, in your classroom, for your future plans, how are you personally engaging with evidence now, and how is your school currently engaging with evidence now? So you can pause the video there if you want to and have a think about that, but please jot some notes down in a journal and bring it with you to your first session. So what I also want you to do is think about where you are now personally on this kind of continuum of how you're using educational research. So again, pause the video, have a proper read of these 4 statements and think honestly about where you'd place yourselves. So this is just some information about the EEF. On the right hand side you've got some key statistics. It was set up by the charity the Sutton Trust, and it's more than doubled the amount of available evidence for randomised control trials in education in this country. It's commissioned about 10% of all known trials in education. In 2012 there were only about 11% of senior leaders were engaging with information provided by the EEF in order to make key decisions. Now it's about 2/3 of senior leaders in schools using the teaching and learning toolkit to inform decisions. So there's much more awareness of the Education Endowment Foundation now. It costs about £45 to add an additional 1 month's learning to a pupil from a poor background. So this is really what its mission is about. So the EEF has 3 roles. One is about generation of research. So you might see adverts asking schools to take part in randomised controlled trials. The other thing they do is they synthesise the research that's out there. So they will look for us at the available evidence out there and synthesise it into something that's a more manageable format. And that's what you see in the teaching and learning toolkit. And often, really what we've got to think about is what sits behind that 2-side piece of information in the toolkit. And quite often it's thousands of pieces of research. So metacognition, for example, they were looking at around about 1,500 pieces of evidence in order to produce that guidance report. And that's where mobilisation comes in. So mobilisation is about distilling that information into something that's usable by teachers to mobilise that knowledge. That's what we're about in the Research Schools Network. So that's what the map is about, and the guidance reports. If you've read any guidance reports, which I'm sure you have, you'll see that they're divided into key recommendations. So around the country there are 13 research schools and 22 no, they're not. So around the country there are 27 research schools and 11 associate research schools all over England. They were appointed initially in about 2015 to 16, and then the associate research schools and some extra schools were added in 2019. So there's been over £17 million invested in this project. And what do we do as Research Schools Networks? Well, this is our key aims. We provide communication and events. So we do blogs, we do newsletters, we put on Twilight deep dives. We don't count those as training, they're classed as communication. We support schools in accessing the educational research that's out there and trying to get them aware of what's available to them. We deliver high quality training, and those courses are usually about 3 days long, because what the evidence shows is that courses need to have sustained input over time and gap tasks and wraparound support such as coaching. And we also partner up with schools and system leaders and local authorities in order to address particular needs in those schools or local authorities as well. So what we try to do is get teachers and senior leaders to understand the evidence, but also understand how their practice, their individual practice and their practice in the schools reflects that. And that's a lot of what we'll talk about on the first module of the course. So this is what the research schools are not. So again, I just want you to pause the video there and read through those bullet points. So what we ask of schools is that they consider how what we're delivering to them can be applied in their own context, rather than copying something that another school has done or that somebody's told them works well in their school. They need to think about how it fits with their own contexts and their own particular challenges. And this is why the Research Schools Network is so important, and indeed why your role as an evidence lead will be important as well, because these are some of the things that you will be doing. So this is why the Research Schools Network is important, and why your role as an evidence lead will be important, because these are some of the things that you will be involved in. It will be important for you to signpost your schools to evidence-based programs, to the teaching and learning toolkit. We are the kind of gatekeepers of that knowledge. We don't know everything, so don't worry, you're not going to need to know every piece of research that's out there. That's impossible. But what the EEF provides us with is a go-to place for things we can look at in order to support people. So if you ever don't know the answer to a question from a school or a colleague, just say you don't know, but you'll have a look at where you can find that evidence. And that's about authenticity with our schools and providing some kind of rapport with them so that we can engage them in the process of using evidence. So this slide is about our main responsibility, really. We are the gatekeepers of that knowledge. So we take what we know from academic research that's distilled into something usable for teachers in guidance reports and in the teaching and learning toolkit, but then it's our responsibility to distill that even further into a course, into communication, into wraparound support with teachers so that they really fully understand. So if I take the metacognition guidance report, for example, quite a few teachers will look at that and think, I'm doing that already. So when we unpick that guidance report and unpick what sits behind it, people start to challenge their own behaviour in relation to metacognition, and that's our role. So of course the big question about evidence-informed practice is why? And this is the answer. We need to try to provide ways of improving outcomes for all children, and having evidence-informed basis can help us with that. And this is the evidence, the research that shows us why that's important. The gap grows as children go through education between the start of school and the end of school. The gap between the most advantaged and the least advantaged just widens. So you can see there in early years, there's a 4.3 month gap. So that's what children start with when they start education. And by secondary schools, that can grow to 19.3 months. And you can see here that that gap is in all schools. So if you look at the difference between non-disadvantaged and disadvantaged children, it doesn't matter whether they're in an inadequate school or an outstanding school, there is a gap. But there are schools that are improving, and that's what this chart shows you. 1,726 primary schools where the performance of disadvantaged pupils is better. So How are they bucking the trend? What are they doing and why is it working? And how we can learn precisely from these schools is what makes a difference. So one way we can learn from other schools is through the EEF Family of Schools database. It helps you find the 50 most similar schools to you. So if you haven't ever looked at this before, it's worth going to have a look. It uses the last 3 years of data published by the DFE, and then the schools are placed into families of 50 based on a range of characteristics, including prior attainment, the proportions of pupils eligible for free school meals, those identified as EAL, those with special educational needs and disabilities. So it's worth taking some time before the start of Module 1 to look up your school and the family of schools that it's in. And you could even reach out to other schools in a similar situation to you in that 50 schools and have a look what they're doing. And of course, no session would be complete at the moment without reference to COVID-19 and its impact on the attainment gap. And it's quite startling, really. So to try and give us some idea about the impact of school closures on the attainment gap, the EEF conducted a rapid evidence assessment of existing literature, and the search encompassed a wide variety of reasons for schools being closed, including the summer holidays. So we don't really yet know what the impact will be, but we can make some judgments about what it might be based on existing evidence of similar things. Of course, there's never been anything like COVID-19 lockdown, but we have got similar things. So the projections suggest that school closures will widen the attainment gap between disadvantaged children and their peers. We've been narrowing the gap since 2011. So at best, what we might expect is a slight reversing of this process, but we think it could be bigger than that. The median estimate based on existing literature on school closures indicates the gap will widen by 36% at the moment. And this range stems from 11% in some studies to 75% in others. So we think there could already be a 36% gap. So it's very likely that returning to normal working practices is beyond the scope of any school at the moment. But with strong input from the EEF and the government, we've got the catch-up fund of £1 billion. There are 2 guides from the EEF to help teachers and school leaders to tackle the challenges of this very unpredictable academic year, and they are the COVID-19 support guide for schools and the supporting school planning 2020 to 21 for schools as well. So it aims to support school leaders for planning a very unpredictable year, and it's been developed in partnership with schools across the country. Many of the features in there that are suggested to school leaders are also in other guidance reports. So it makes reference to the SEND support, to CEL support, to metacognition. So it brings together some of the key elements of previous guidance reports. So I'm hoping that's given you an idea of what the EEF does, what the Research Schools Network is involved in, and the attainment gap and the impact of, a little bit about the impact of COVID-19 on attainment of children, particularly disadvantaged learners. On the site that I've made for you are some key pieces of reading that I would like you to do before the first session, and I really look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. Take care.